Though Salem, Massachusetts is best known for its infamous witch trials, there have been plenty of other chilling stories throughout its 400-year history. One of them is the tale of Captain Joseph White, a wealthy merchant who was found bludgeoned to death in his bed. It was a crime motivated by money, according to Giovanni Alabiso, owner and tour guide at Salem Historical Tours, who says the 82-year-old merchant was allegedly targeted by greedy brothers hoping to get their hands on his will. Brothers Joseph and Francis Knapp enlisted the help of Richard Crowninshield to help get the job done. Late in the evening, when Captain White is asleep, Dick Crowninshield comes in. He goes upstairs to the second floor and takes a club and bashes the captain over the head and crushes his skull, Alabiso tells Today.com. The murder resulted in a scandalous trial and is said to be the inspiration for Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart, as well as the game Clue. Whether it's the brutal nature of the crime or revenge for the attempt to steal his money, the spirit of Captain Joseph White is said to still wander the halls of his former home. People believe Captain White is roaming around that house, protecting whatever treasure he reportedly has, Alabiso said. Tourists take photos of the house, and despite being empty, many pictures reveal shadowy figures in the windows and on the landing of the Gardner Pingree house. Who are they? No one knows. It's definitely, absolutely active, Alabiso says. The Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, has been around for more than 100 years and was built as a posh getaway for the wealthy seeking solitude in the mountains. As the years passed, however, occupancy declined and by the 1970s, the Grand Hotel had fallen into disrepair. It was around that time that famed author Stephen King spent the night there and was inspired to write the book The Shining. The book and blockbuster film helped return the Stanley to its former glory. Now, guests come in droves to see the hotel that inspired one of the scariest horror movies of all time. Given its history, it should come as no surprise that many visitors report strange happenings. Aware of the ghostly rumors, Texas resident Henry Yao booked a last-minute getaway in April of 2016 to check it out. After arriving, Yao had dinner, then wandered around the Stanley to take photos. Stopping at the staircase, he waited for people to clear the area, then took a picture, thinking nothing of it. Later that night, however, Yao fell seriously ill. "I felt really sick, I had the shivers, I was like, something's really wrong," he tells Today.com. His companion suggested he go to the emergency room, but Yao refused. On the trip home, Yao began swiping through the photos he'd taken when he discovered what he said was a really, really strange image of someone standing on the stairs. Except no one had been there. The next day, he posted the photo on Instagram, half joking that he'd captured a ghost, and the world took notice. Almost overnight, Yao found himself in the limelight with his ghost picture warranting attention from global media outlets and paranormal experts who wanted to examine the photo. Some experts say that there's two ghosts, and other people said that the reason I got sick is because the ghost was trying to materialize, taking energy out of me, he said. There's so many theories about this. And what does Yao think? I have no idea, he says with a laugh. On his way to get married, a military man and his best man set off on an 800-mile road trip from Camp Lejeune in North Carolina to Lafayette, Indiana. It's 1 a.m. on a cold January night in 2014 and the man tells Monsters Among Us that the weather is bad and temperatures are in the negative double digits. As the pair close in on Indianapolis, they discover they have no money to pay for gas to refuel the car and are about to run out. Growing up in the trucking industry with my dad, I decided to stop at a truck stop, the man explains. But because the main interstates were shut down due to the weather, they had get off the highway and search for a truck stop along the back roads instead. Found a smaller truck stop. It had one truck and it was just kind of strange. It was just a blacked-out truck with a blacked-out trailer. There was no real markings on it, nothing distinguishable, he says. They went in, hoping a clerk or waitress would spot them a few dollars for gas enough to make it to Indianapolis, at which time they'd go to the bank, take out cash and pay back the loan. Inside they found a tidy diner, occupied by a waitress, cook and a lone truck driver. I went inside, talked to this driver and he bought us a cup of coffee. We sat there and talked for about 30 minutes about what was going on and why we were headed, where we were and what we were doing. And he gave us $20 for gas. I went outside, pumped our gas, came back in and I told him, "Hey, I really appreciate it. I'll be back." Making good on his word, the man got cash from the bank upon arriving in Indianapolis and returned to the diner. When we arrive at about 10 o'clock in the morning, it's boarded up, he says. It looks like it's been abandoned for years and the truck's gone. But we had just been in there. They pull in anyway and find a police officer parked in the lot. They explain what happened just hours before, to which the cop chuckles and replies, "Oh, you met the ghost of 3. So, 2 military members converse, had a cup of coffee with, interacted with, 3 people at a diner that had a fuel pump. I got $20 worth of gas," says the man. "When I came back, it'd been boarded up for, if I remember correctly, the cop said it had been boarded up for the last 25 years. Considered one of the most haunted restaurants in America, Stone's Public House in Ashland, Massachusetts, doesn't have a ghost problem, it has a ghost problem. Janet Morosini, a longtime resident of Ashland, is the bartender and manager of Stone's Public House, which was built by John Stone back in 1832. According to Morosini, even before she began working at the inn, she heard stories of the ghost of a young boy roaming the halls of the restaurant, which once served as an ad hoc hospital during the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918. It makes sense, Morosini tells Today.com. That's where they would quarantine all the sick people, she explains. Apparently, quite a few souls have passed just due to that. The inn is also the site for other untimely deaths, including that of a young girl who was struck and killed by a train while she played near the railroad tracks bordering the property. According to Morosini, a father and son visiting the inn stepped outside the restaurant to watch the trains. After coming back inside, Morosini overheard the father reassuring his young son that there wasn't anyone else outside, despite the son insisting he'd seen a little girl sitting beside them. He's like, "She was sitting right next to me. She was crying. You didn't see the little girl." And the dad said, "There was nobody there, it was just me and you, buddy," Morosini recalls. Other ghosts are said to haunt the old inn, including that of proprietor John Stone, who Morosini says didn't actually die there, but is believed to be watching over the place. One night when Morosini was alone at the inn, she says she heard footsteps walking directly above her on the second floor. "I was just like, there is no explanation for that whatsoever. I'm leaving," she tells Today.com. Still, she doesn't believe that the spirits have bad intentions. "I've never had that scary, hair on the back of your neck gotta get out of the building feeling there." When Marty was a child back in the 90s, she tells Monsters Among Us that she was a fan of ventriloquist Edgar Bergen and his dummy sidekick, Charlie McCarthy. She says that when her father came across a ventriloquist doll as he wandered through a small magic shop located outside of Santa Rosa, California, he decided to buy it for her birthday. While ringing up the sale, Marty says the cashier gave her father weird vibes and said to him, "You know, when you put your hand inside the doll, he's going to come alive." Laughing off the comment, he brought the dummy home to his daughter. According to Marty, she was over the moon when dad gave her the doll, saying, "I was so happy when I got that doll, I was obsessed." But before long, strange things began happening. Though impossible because the doll's head was made of hard plastic, she says its expression would change, including his smile. Worried something would happen to her precious dummy, Marty's family shut it away in a cupboard most nights. One night, she and her family were awakened by the pitter-patter of steps in their living room. Thinking it was the dog or another family member, they went to look. No one was there. Except for the doll, who was sitting on the couch. "We remember specifically we always put it away because I loved that doll so much that I took care of it," Marty says on the podcast. Other strange occurrences began happening. While Marty and her dad were away, her uncle was alone in the house. The uncle says he heard Marty's father calling his name from the living room, even though he wasn't home. When he went to look, he found the doll, once again, sitting on the couch. And no one else. "All of our family was pretty much scared of the doll," Marty says. "People would start hearing their names being called, and we would hear walking at night. So, we just decided we needed to get rid of it." Being Mexican and religious, Marty says her parents wanted to burn the doll in case it was demonic. They put it on the grill and, according to Marty, it wouldn't burn. This doll would not go up in flames, at all, whatsoever. They tried cutting it up with a knife, but were unsuccessful. Finally, they threw it in the trash can. After the garbage was collected, Marty's dad went to retrieve the bin. In it, the doll. To rid themselves of the dummy, they dug a hole in the backyard, then filled it with cement. Marty and family have long since moved away, but she says they still think about the doll and the possibility that eventually it finds one of us. On August 4, 1892, Andrew and his wife, Abby Borden, were found brutally murdered in their Fall River, Massachusetts, home. Though murder wasn't uncommon in the late 1800s, the fact that they were bludgeoned to death with an axe and the main suspect was their 32-year-old daughter, Lizzie Borden, certainly was. The crime and trial that followed made headlines around the world. Lizzie was ultimately acquitted of murder, but she remains forever linked to the heinous killings, as does the home where the crime was committed. Now a bed and breakfast and museum, the Borden home attracts history buffs and thrill seekers who come to see for themselves if rumors that the house is haunted are, indeed, true. When I started working here, it was more of the history. I really didn't care about the paranormal, Suzanne St. John, a realtor and tour guide at the Lizzie Borden House, tells Today.com. However, that all changed after St. John says she experienced a few unusual happenings of her own. Guests tell us they hear laughing and playing in the middle of the night, things get moved around, she says. And St. John has experienced a few unusual things herself, saying that once she discovered toys scattered across a room that no one had been in. St. John also talks of a picture that fell over and slid 2 feet across the floor without any plausible explanation, as well as a closet door that once opened on its own volition. On the eve of the anniversary of Andrew and Abby's murder, St. John says that she and 2 other tour guides at the house felt a sudden sharp, piercing pain in their left eyes, the same exact location of Andrew Borden's fatal injuries. Perhaps the most unsettling, however, is the story St. John tells of a tour guide at the Lizzie Borden house who asked her group to silence their cell phones before beginning the tour. Moments later, a guest's cell phone rang. She looked up and said, "It's my mom." The tour guide asked if she wanted to leave and take the call, to which the woman replied, "She died 2 years ago." Jacqueline from Oklahoma says that while her memories have faded over the years, she recalls having an imaginary friend when she was young. Her grandparents, Granny Junie and Pa Hank, lived in a small home with a quiet backyard. Jacqueline recalls visiting them as a child. "I have very good memories of my Pa Hank," Jacqueline says on the podcast, Monsters Among Us. "He would sit under the tree with me and tell me stories. The stories were often about his life and memories of Prohibition," she says. "He was actually a very interesting character. The only problem." Her grandfather died in 1981, and Jacqueline was born in 1982. "I don't think I ever realized that I was getting stories from a ghost," she says, adding that the rest of her family knew of his presence in the house. "My Granny Junie would never stay in the house on the anniversary of his death," she says. "He did die in the house." Jacqueline also recalls hearing Pa Hank get up in the middle of the night when she was staying at the house. "It never occurred to me that these were memories of an entity," she said. In hindsight, Jacqueline says that even though her childhood, imaginary friend, was actually her dead grandfather, it casts a different light because it was a relative and not a stranger. "It never felt like ghosts, it felt like talking to my Pa Hank." On Monsters Among Us, a caller named Joe tells of moving to Georgia from California in the late 1990s. Soon after, he says his brother followed him to the Peach State and rented an old house built in the 1800s. It looked nice from the outside. It did not feel good from the inside, Joe says during the podcast. According to Joe, things seemed off from the moment he helped his brother move into the home. "I walked into the house and went, oh, man. The hair stood up on the back of my neck, and I just felt ill at ease, like this place isn't cool at all," he says. Moments later, while carrying items into the bedroom, Joe says he heard whispering. A heated whispering, almost an argument, between 2 people that seemed to be hovering in the top of the ceiling area of the room, he adds. Joe ran out of the room and asked his brother if he'd felt something off about the house, too. His brother had picked up on the vibe, but assured Joe that things would be all right. "As long as you're good," Joe says he told his brother. "I'm not good, but I'm going to help you. I'm going home and I probably won't come back here." And, sure enough, Joe's brother began experiencing unusual occurrences in the house. The most alarming, however, was when Joe says his young niece was found wandering alone on a busy road with her hand up in the air. Police and other agencies were called to investigate the incident, and when asked, his brother's 4-year-old explained that she'd gone for a stroll with the old lady that lives here. She just wanted to go for a walk, so we went for a walk. Given that the front door was too heavy for a 4-year-old to open by herself, no one could understand how she was able to leave the house. According to Joe, his niece said, "The old lady opened the door, then we petted the dog for a little bit, then went for a walk." She was so genuine and honest at 4 years old, that he couldn't call her liar, Joe says during the podcast. Soon after, his brother moved and never returned. In the mid-1990s, Robert worked as paramedic in a small Texas town and tells the story of a strange happening that he and his partner experienced on a call one night. After receiving a call for a female having chest pains, he and his partner climbed in the ambulance to make their way to the address. "We took off code 3, which means using our emergency lights and sirens," Robert recalls. In the absence of GPS back then, Robert says that they relied on maps and mailbox numbers to guide them to the rural location. "The address we were going to was a very rural one," says Robert. "So, there was no street lights and it was a very dark night, so it was very difficult to read the mailboxes." As they searched for the correct driveway, Robert says he turned off the sirens. After determining they'd found it, they pulled in only to discover they were mistaken. "So, we turned off the emergency lights as we backed up to the road and went up the correct driveway," he explains. Upon arriving at the scene, the paramedics realized that they'd been at the exact same address the month prior for a male suffering from cardiac arrest. In typical medical black humor fashion, we mentioned to each other that this was probably the wife who was now having a heart attack and was now going to go join her husband. They jumped from the ambulance, bags in tow, and began treating the woman, who, fortunately, ended up being all right. Robert says he sent his partner to get the stretcher from the ambulance so they could take her to hospital for evaluation. When he returned, he had this strange questioning look on his face, according to Robert. The pair wheeled the patient out to the emergency vehicle, and that's when Robert saw that the ambulance had nearly every light it was equipped with turned on. Strobe lights, floodlights, some interior lights. Everything on. After taking the patient to the hospital, Robert asked his partner why he'd turned on all the lights. He hadn't. In fact, he reminded Robert that they'd shut them all off after going to the wrong address. "Neither of us recall activating the emergency lights, strobes, or floodlights when we arrived at the house. There was no real reason to do so, we'd already gotten there. In the end, we wrote it off as her dead husband letting her know that he was still there." In the 1990s, Julie, a resident of Portland, Oregon, was driving out the city to meet with friends when she found herself in traffic. The 18-year-old soon discovered that the cause of the slowdown was due to a dreadful car crash, and to her horror, as she passed the scene, she realized that someone had died. "A moment later, there was a woman sitting in my passenger seat," Julie says. Though she admits it sounds crazy, Julie reports seeing a woman dressed in work clothes seated next to her. And despite being in complete shock, the woman in the passenger seat was even more freaked out. "She looked like somebody who just suddenly ended up in somebody else's car," Julie says of the incident. Panicked, the woman demanded to know how she got there and who Julie was. It was then that Julie noticed the woman had an unearthly quality about her and realized that whoever she'd passed on the side of the road was somehow in the car with her. "Ma'am, you need to calm down, my name is Julie and I'm here to help," she says she told the stranger. Julie later went on to explain to the woman that she'd been in a car accident and somehow ended up in her passenger seat. The woman was stricken. At that exact minute, they passed a clearing in the trees. With some encouragement from Julie, the woman peacefully walked toward the sun, then disappeared. In completely disbelief, Julie pulled over and convinced herself she'd imagined the whole thing. Several days later, however, a story came on the news about a trucker injured in a car accident. Before they finished, they threw a picture up of the woman that was in my car and explained that she had passed away in the accident, Julie says during the podcast. "It was unbelievable, it was too much.